I find this kind of wild. It's definitely going to be a little bit of a clickbaity title, but I'm talking about how I sort of predicted some of the features that are showing up in 1.22. Specifically, these are features that I found in this biome right in front of me here, the Pale Gardens biome. Now, when I say that I predicted them, I don't mean I necessarily predicted them in this instance, but I did want to see some of these changes made, and I think that they're quite lovely. So I'm very happy, very excited about this biome. Hopefully you enjoy this content. Be sure to subscribe if you do. Let's go ahead and get into it. So first things first, this biome brings with it a lot of potential, in my opinion, for as simple and straightforward as it is. But one of those things is this mob right here. I'm not going to go too in depth for the mob itself because this is not necessarily a mob that I predicted, at least not in this concept. However, I did want a weeping angel type of mob. I don't believe that's something I've mentioned in video in the past, since this is not primarily a Minecraft focused video, but it is something that I've wrote down specifically as I was sort of theory crafting an idea for my own Minecraft update. Maybe that's a video I'll make in the future if that's something you're interested in. That said though, one of the other things I want to see outside of a weeping angel type of mob, which if you don't know what that is, that's essentially a mob that when you look at it, of course in survival mode, not in creative, it will not move. But when you look away from it, it is going to pursue you from that point on. Now, there are certain ways to actually like aggravate this mob. Again, not going too into detail about it. There are plenty of other people who are much more well-versed on this mob specifically and know all the mechanics in and out. I am not one of those people. That said, though, another thing that I have wanted to see is a mob that is locked to a biome. Now, I've actually talked about this in a previous video. This is not the mob that I was thinking of. Rather, it's something that I called the Zealot. And I'll actually link that video at the end of this one if that's something you want to check out. But ultimately, that was a mob that actually added a lot of added value to more late game play, because it was a mob that actually worked around. Well, again, I don't want to spoil it too much here. It's just a really good, I think, mob concept. So again, that video will be linked at the end of this one. I highly recommend you check it out. That said, I have also wanted, and I think many people have, wanted a biome that has a sort of spooky vibe to it. This biome does a great job at that. For one thing, being very muted, very gray tone in its appearance. But it's not just that, though. The ambient sound of the wood creaking as it, well, exists, right? The falling leaves, which is another thing that I've also wanted. And I may have even mentioned in my concept video for the autumnal forest specifically. Again, if I can link it at the end of this one, I will, because I love that idea. That said, though, having a biome with spooky vibes, my idea was not an above ground biome though, specifically. So this was not the concept. Rather, I had an idea specifically for like a haunted cave, but that is also where I wanted to implement the sort of weeping angel type of mob. So actually bringing something like that into the game here would feel pretty appropriate. Currently, the Pale Garden is just a rare, I want to say variant, if anything. That may be slightly untrue because I don't think it necessarily we'll just call it a variant. It's essentially a variant of the deep dark forest, or not deep dark, I'm sorry, dark roofed forest. But ultimately, it is sort of like an appendage on that forest. It sort of grows off of it, right? So as you can see here, it's a really lovely concept. And so I thought this would be such a lovely thing to expand to other biomes as well. What about like a spooky desert? Something similar to this. A pale desert would be fantastic. Again, kind of something that I played to, except mine was not supposed to go into this pale aesthetic, but rather was going more towards a cold desert. So I wanted to see something that had like frosted grass and things like that. Again, a different concept completely, will be covered probably in another video ultimately in the future. But still, this biome in and of itself is going to lend itself to making a biome like that possible thanks to blocks like these. Moving on from there though. So recapping, as I mentioned, mobs locked to the biome, spooky vibes for specific biomes like this one here. I want to focus now on the most colorful thing in the biome currently, which is this one right here, the eye blossom. This is and functions exactly like something I wanted in the game. Now, it's even a flower, but in my case, it was going to be a wild potato flower. And I know that sounds weird at first, but first off, I am somebody who is very passionate about plants. I love botany. I love learning about new plants and things like that. But it's also worth noting too that the functionality, the mechanics of this are very simple. It opens at night and closes in the daytime. My potato blossom was going to do the same thing. Now, there are some differences. For one thing, my potato blossom was likely going to be a 2-block tall flower, so similar to like sunflowers or lilacs, things like that. And the idea was that when it opens and when it closes, that can be detected by an observer, and thus can be that signal can be sent out, ultimately making an alternative to a daylight sensor. Now, I have no idea. I've not tested this with redstone. I have no idea if the observer picks up the change on it, but it just makes sense that it would, which is also, again, one reason why I wanted to see it in the game. But I've also wanted to see wild variants of, crop-like plants in the game for a while. Wild carrots, wild potatoes, wild beets, etc. Anyway, again, that is a part of a separate biome, which is also a rare variant of another biome. So it sort of bleeds back into this one too, but I digress from there. So next up, wood with grayscale tones, right? So in this case here, we're getting the pale oak log is what this is called. Now, in my case, it was actually going to be both the baobab and the ebony tree that were both going to contain neutral colored woods. The ebony tree, of course, was going to contain a near black colored wood, while the baobab was probably going to be a little bit darker than this. So I'm very glad we're getting a white tone wood here. But ultimately, this is very similar to that concept, even had gray bark on the outside. So the contrast there was definitely something that I had considered. Not important. Still, though, we don't have the baobab trees in the game yet. I do hope that that is something that we see at some point in time. I've designed some that I do think look quite fitting for the game. But again, pulling back off of that for a moment, still getting something with gray tones like this, and in this case, near white tones, is really nice. And it's something that I completely overlooked, but I'm glad to have sort of thought adjacent to it, right? Because having woods that share colors with like bone blocks in the game that have a very spooky vibe. There's something just very spooky about a weathered white wood. And I love that. So very glad we're getting that. The falling leaves, the ambient noise, the gray tone woods, as I mentioned, the weeping angel type of mob or mob behavior, plants opening at night and at day, spooky vibe type biomes, which is, I'm not the first person to think of that stuff, so do not credit me with any of this, but I do think ultimately having all of this exist in just one biome in this game is actually pretty special. It makes the biome really stand out. Is this a biome I think you should visit when it is fully released? Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a lot to love here. The trees have a lovely aesthetic to them, very similar to the dark oak trees. Maybe slightly different in their growth patterns, but honestly, I haven't compared the two, so I'm not willing to make that judgment, and it doesn't really matter anyway. But I'm very glad to see something like this. I am liking these sort of like really brushy moss chains hanging down from these. No idea how they function as of yet. And of course, the pale moss blocks, all of this. Even with the moss carpet, kind of similar to another thing I wanted to see. But again, this video has been long enough, so I'm going to go ahead and leave you with this. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, again, make sure to check out my other Minecraft videos. Not a Minecraft focused channel, but that if that is something you want to see more of, well, I'll know by leaving a comment. So let me know in the comments. I'll see you on the next one. Take care.